The suburb of Rosemore Heights in western Pennsylvania seemed, to an outsider's eye, like a gentle, well-ordered paradise. Tidy, tree-lined streets meandered past colonial-style homes, each with a perfectly kept lawn, neither overgrown nor overzealous. The people who lived there hailed from various walks of life. Retirees who wanted tranquility in their golden years, middle-aged professionals seeking a stable environment for their children, and even a handful of newlyweds fresh out of graduate school, eager to carve out a sense of home. The single-story brick houses and Cape Cod cottages all obeyed the same unspoken design ethic: neutral paint, matching shutters, carefully spaced flower beds. On weekends, neighbors chatted across fences while kids zoomed by on scooters. In the late spring, the smell of freshly cut grass wafted through the open windows, blending with the faint aroma of grilled burgers and hot dogs. It all felt as serene and wholesome as a picture on a real estate brochure. At least, that was the general impression. Beneath the surface, however, tensions brewed. Much of the friction revolved around the Rosemore Heights Homeowners Association, a body meant to protect property values and ensure everyone followed basic community guidelines. And the focal point for this friction was a particular woman, a middle-aged lady who could, at a glance, pass for any standard suburban matriarch: an immaculate blonde bob, pastel sweaters, and a penchant for large, glitzy brooches. Her name was Patricia Wentworth, though among neighbors who had run afoul of her unwavering sense of the rules, she was sarcastically known as Karen. Patricia, or Karen, lived on Camellia Place, a cul-de-sac flanked by towering maples and rows of hydrangea bushes. Hers was a gray stone house with pale blue shutters, sporting a broad covered porch that faced the entire street, almost as if it were a watchtower from which she could survey the comings and goings of every household. Indeed, it often felt that way to many in the neighborhood. With a smartphone perpetually in hand, she kept close track of every car parked overnight, every unapproved fence color, and every child's toy left too long on a neighbor's front lawn. Yet for all her officiousness, she had not quite crossed the line into outright tyranny. Not yet. Most people shrugged her off as an overzealous do-gooder, the type who sometimes called the police over mild disturbances. But if anyone bothered to pay attention to the undercurrents at the HOA board meetings, they'd notice Patricia systematically gaining more influence. She courted allies among the less active board members with compliments, occasionally hosting casual brunches that turned into volunteer sign-up sessions. As mild winter gave way to spring in Rosemore Heights, she was about to deliver the neighborhood a brand new, ironclad set of regulations, and one of them, in particular, would ignite a major conflict. Rosemore Heights had always functioned with a fairly standard set of HOA rules. Weekly trash collection was a routine chore. Large communal bins, shared by sets of 3 or 4 adjacent houses, were placed near the curb on Sundays, and the local disposal company picked them up every Monday morning. At times, an odor from a bin might become noticeable if residents threw out old food or other waste too early, but for the most part, nobody complained. Until Patricia took a sudden interest in precisely what people were tossing in the bins. It started innocently enough. One Wednesday evening, Henry Caldwell, a gentle and well-liked retiree in his early 80s, trundled out his trash. Because of his arthritis, Henry often struggled lifting the bin lid, and he used a short, angled piece of wood to prop it open. 2 days prior, his visiting nurse had left extra adult incontinence products for him. Despite his embarrassment about using them, Henry was practical. He had to live comfortably. With nobody watching, he simply deposited them into the bin in a sealed plastic bag. But that very moment, a car turned onto the street. Headlights lit the scene. Patricia's Lexus slowed to a crawl as she passed by. She glimpsed Henry throwing something away, something large and plastic. And from that split-second sight, her mind latched onto an idea: adult diapers. She grimaced, pressing her lips into a pinched line. As far as she was concerned, such items were unsanitary, and God forbid they ended up in the communal bin if they could be singled out for special disposal. Her reactivity might have died out overnight, but by the next morning, she was penning a frantic email to the rest of the HOA board. We need to protect the integrity of our waste disposal system and the health of our residents. Some neighbors may be improperly disposing of certain items, leading to unpleasant odors or worse, biohazards. She concluded with, I propose a discussion on adult incontinence products at our next session. The older, less strict board members raised eyebrows at the email, privately thinking that Patricia might be overreacting. Still, she was in charge of the official HOA communications, so the matter would appear on the next meeting's agenda. News of the upcoming discussion spread through the neighborhood. The rumor mill churned. She's going to ban diapers from the trash bins. She wants fines for adult briefs. She's calling them a biohazard. Within days, one fact had hardened into near certainty. Patricia planned to put her foot down. If the neighborhood was unsettled by the rumor, those who used adult incontinence products or had senior family members in the house found themselves terrified. Was this real? Surely, it was an overstep. It sounded almost too absurd to be true. But as the date for the next HOA board meeting approached, that sense of dread only multiplied. On a bright spring day, the HOA meeting convened in the large, glass-walled community center near the Rosemore Heights entrance. Rows of chairs were laid out with a narrow aisle down the middle. The unspoken tension hovered in the air. A healthy turnout of residents had come, some out of curiosity, some out of worry, some simply eager to watch a potential scandal unfold. Patricia, perched behind a long wooden table alongside the other 4 board members, opened the meeting with her usual ceremonial remarks. She wore her signature pastel cardigan with an oversized brooch in the shape of a rose. A tall stack of manila folders lay in front of her, each brimming with notes and printouts. After discussing the typical housekeeping issues, roof colors, fence height regulations, proper lawn maintenance, she took a sip from her water bottle, cleared her throat dramatically, and declared, "Now, let's talk about items that pose potential biohazards in our shared disposal bins." Murmurs swept across the audience. "I have observed," Patricia began, adopting a tone that dripped with false concern, "that certain residents, particularly our more senior neighbors, may be discarding adult incontinence products into the communal trash. While I understand these items are necessary, the odors they produce are not. And if any bag were to break or leak, we would face an unsanitary situation that could put neighbors at risk." She paused for effect, letting the silence amplify her words. A couple of people in the audience exchanged exasperated looks. Patricia continued, "I am introducing a motion that we revise the HOA rules for communal bin usage. Specifically, no one may discard used adult diapers, briefs, or similar products in the bins unless sealed by special disposal methods, which our local waste management company deems appropriate. And because of the risk they pose, even sealed bags should be accompanied by a monthly fee of $15. This covers additional sanitation steps." The other board members looked uneasy. Some had obviously not been briefed on the extent of Patricia's plan. Greg Madsen, a retired teacher who served as the board treasurer, coughed nervously, adjusting his reading glasses. "Patricia," he said carefully, "this might be quite restrictive. Many of our residents might struggle with the extra cost, not to mention the feeling of being singled out for using necessary medical products. Are we certain we want to go this route?" But Patricia's resolve was iron. She set her jaw, leaning forward in her chair. "I have researched this thoroughly, Greg. If we don't create a special regulation, we risk a buildup of unpleasant smells, or, worse, health hazards. Rosemore Heights is a premium community. We don't want to compromise our standards." Though not all the board members agreed, Patricia's seat as HOA president granted her outsized influence. When she formally called for a vote, the motion passed by a narrow margin. Patricia beamed, rapping her gavel lightly against the wooden table. "Motion approved. We'll implement the new policy starting June 1st, she declared. A low grumble rippled among the gathering. Seniors, in particular, stared at one another with disbelief. Even those who weren't seniors but simply empathized with them shook their heads in dismay. In the days that followed, the entire neighborhood buzzed with indignation or confusion. Henry Caldwell tried to hide his worry. He had a fixed income and dreaded the added cost. A few neighbors with parents who wore adult diapers found themselves outraged on their loved ones' behalf. And so, the seeds of a neighborhood-wide revolt began to take root. Though Patricia herself remained smugly oblivious, convinced she was doing the right thing. Life in Rosemore Heights took on a new, tense rhythm after Patricia's policy announcement. Some neighbors whispered in driveways that she was putting old people to shame. Others, especially families caring for elderly relatives at home, whispered among themselves, trying to figure out ways to avoid her rule. A sense of resentment at the intrusion into private matters percolated everywhere. The following week, a small group organized an informal meeting on Harriet Green's front porch. Harriet was a no-nonsense widow in her late 70s who maintained a bright yellow house with cheerful, flower-filled window boxes. Sitting in a circle of folding chairs were Henry Caldwell, Harriet herself, Martin and Sarah Ferguson, parents to a wheelchair-bound mother who lived with them, and a younger couple, Daniel and Mia Garcia, who had a beloved grandfather visiting for the summer. Others who were outraged by the new rule occasionally stopped by, adding their voices to the discussion. "These are necessities," Harriet fumed, arms crossed. "Incontinent folks aren't simply choosing to be inconvenient. We can't just decide not to throw these items away. It's humiliating for us to be singled out." Sarah Ferguson added, "I don't even want to imagine how my mother's going to feel if she learns she has to pay a special trash fee because of something she can't control." Henry Caldwell nodded gravely, hands trembling a bit on his cane. "We need a solution, some sort of alternative." Ideas flew around. Some suggested that they hide adult diapers in grocery bags or bury them beneath other garbage, hoping Patricia wouldn't notice. But the new regulation came with a threat of random bin checks. Patricia had practically boasted she would conduct them if she suspected residents were breaking the rule. The mention of these spot checks infuriated Harriet. "She has no business rifling through our trash. This is where we live." After much debate, it was Martin Ferguson who, glancing at his phone, said, "Wait a second. Why don't we just, I don't know, set up a private disposal service? I recall reading that medical offices and hospice centers sometimes hire a specialized company to dispose of things like adult diapers or other, more sensitive items." Everyone considered it. "But wouldn't that be expensive?" asked Mia Garcia. She was in her late 20s and worked as a medical receptionist in a nearby clinic. "It might cost a bit," Martin conceded, "but if we pool our resources, everyone who needs it or sympathizes could pitch in. Maybe we can hire a weekly pickup. Then we wouldn't have to put anything in the communal bins. And since it's a private arrangement, the HOA wouldn't have jurisdiction over it." Harriet's eyes sparkled with hope. "Patricia can't ban a private service from taking things directly from our homes, right?" The group looked at each other, seeing the potential of this idea. The trouble was finding the right company and making sure they had enough support in the neighborhood to pay the monthly or bi-weekly fee. But it felt like a glimmer of possibility, a defiant stand against Patricia's humiliating rules. They decided to explore the plan further. Harriet would call the local hospice to see if they could recommend a disposal service. Martin would talk to his coworker who had arranged specialized pickups for a relative in assisted living. Meanwhile, Daniel and Mia planned to circulate a discreet flyer, inviting neighbors, particularly those with older family members, to a bigger meeting to discuss forming what they tentatively labeled the Rosemore Dignity Alliance. Rosemore Dignity Alliance? Harriet let out a deep chuckle. "That sounds official, I like it." Sarah Ferguson agreed. "Yes, it might galvanize more people. At minimum, it'll raise awareness that we're not powerless." Before everyone parted ways, Harriet served lemonade and cookies. The mood among them had brightened, like the first stirring of a gentle rebellion. Unspoken in their optimism was a quiet concern. What might Patricia do if she discovered their plan? Within a week, Harriet Green had secured an appointment with Clean Care Solutions, a disposal company that specialized in medical waste pickups for small clinics and private homes dealing with medical conditions. She explained the neighborhood's predicament, emphasizing the desire for a discreet, respectful, and cost-effective service. Clean Care Solutions expressed keen interest. They were a smaller, family-run outfit looking for new clients. After hearing Harriet's pitch, they proposed a group rate if enough households joined. They would schedule a special truck to pass through Rosemore Heights on Wednesday mornings, collecting sealed garbage bags or small bins specifically for adult incontinence products and any other medical waste someone might need to discard. When Harriet brought the details to the next Rosemore Dignity Alliance gathering, this time held in Martin and Sarah Ferguson's backyard, everyone seemed impressed. The cost for each participating household, once divided among enough members, would be far cheaper than the monthly HOA-imposed fee proposed by Patricia. Best of all, it would remove the moral stigma. No rummaging. No humiliating bin checks. "It's a blessing," sighed Henry Caldwell, feeling relief lighten his chest for the first time since the fiasco began. "I can't believe we're doing this. It feels like we're taking back some control." Still, the group knew they were walking a tightrope. Patricia might attempt to sabotage or forbid this outside service if she caught wind of it, though Harriet argued that the HOA couldn't legally stop a private homeowner from hiring a legitimate disposal company. But they also suspected Patricia would lash out if she felt her authority threatened. They prepared quietly. Each person who chose to join would sign a simple agreement with Clean Care Solutions. They'd keep the bright green pickup bins behind their side gate or in their garage. On Wednesday mornings, they would place them discreetly at the end of their driveway for just a short window, then bring them back in once collected. The arrangement was set to go live in 3 weeks. Word spread quickly among sympathetic neighbors. Even some who didn't need the service chipped in financially out of solidarity. It became a rallying cry. "Let's protect the dignity of our seniors and show Patricia we're not her subjects." Patricia seemed to sense something stirring, but for a while, she couldn't pinpoint what. She noticed certain neighbors whispering more frequently, occasionally glancing her way. She had a hunch that they were plotting something, but none of them had confronted her directly yet. What truly enraged her was that, despite her newly passed rule, she didn't see an increase in the special $15 fees. Fewer than half a dozen people had paid it in the first month, mostly out of confusion or fear. She suspected others were sneaking adult diapers into the bins regardless, but each time she conducted a stealthy spot check, the communal bins appeared normal, no suspicious bags in sight. She had no idea that an entirely separate pickup was siphoning away the very items she'd wanted to punish. The real showdown began on a muggy Tuesday afternoon, just a few days before the new disposal service would officially start. Patricia was driving home, already in a sour mood from an argument she'd had with the local dry cleaner. As she turned onto Maple Crest Drive, she spotted something unusual by Harriet Green's driveway. A small, green-lidded bin emblazoned with the Clean Care Solutions logo. Patricia narrowed her eyes, tapping her manicured nails against the steering wheel. She parked her Lexus in front of her house, then walked briskly down the block, ignoring the waves from a couple of neighbors. Stopping in front of Harriet's driveway, she studied the Clean Care bin. There was a phone number, a company name, and a service ID sticker, but no reference to the HOA. Private disposal? She wondered, feeling an immediate wave of outrage surge through her. How dare Harriet circumvent the newly established rules about adult diapers? Ignoring the concept of personal boundaries, Patricia marched up to Harriet's front door and pounded on it. Harriet answered, eyebrows raised at the intrusion. "Patricia," Harriet greeted stiffly. Patricia forced a cold smile. "I couldn't help but notice that bin on your property. It's not one of the HOA-approved disposal units. I'm concerned about potential code violations." Harriet took a steadying breath. "I'm allowed to hire any legal, private waste service I want. This has nothing to do with the HOA. It's for personal medical waste disposal." Patricia's lips pursed. "But the HOA has guidelines about how trash is collected. Anything thrown out in this neighborhood must adhere to those guidelines." "That only applies to the communal bins," Harriet retorted. "This is a private service coming onto my private property. It's not in the bylaws that we can't do that." Patricia's cheeks colored slightly. She was unaccustomed to being challenged so directly. "We'll see about that," she hissed. Without another word, she pivoted on her heel and stormed back toward her Lexus. By that evening, Patricia had sent another all-caps email to the entire HOA board, titled, "Urgent Concern, Private Garbage Disposal Companies." She demanded an emergency meeting to block or heavily regulate any new disposal service. The flurry of replies suggested, however, that the board was split. A couple members agreed to discuss it, but others, exasperated by Patricia's heavy-handed approach, insisted that the bylaws did not grant them the authority to stop private services. Frustrated but undeterred, Patricia decided to show up uninvited at random neighbors' homes, asking pointed questions about whether they intended to use some rogue disposal service. She tried to sow fear by claiming she'd impose new fees, but her threats carried no real legal teeth. The more she harassed them, the more resentment and quiet resolve spread among the residents. Meanwhile, Harriet and her allies pressed forward. Clean Care Solutions was set to begin its first pickups the next morning. The Rosemore Dignity Alliance had grown from half a dozen families to nearly 15 households, each determined to do their part to shield seniors from Patricia's humiliating policies. Even neighbors who weren't personally affected recognized that it was a cause worth supporting, one that underscored the neighborhood's core values of mutual respect and compassion. Early Wednesday morning dawned gray and humid. Most of Rosemore Heights was still asleep when the Clean Care Solutions truck rolled in around 6 a.m. house by house, driveway by driveway. The uniformed employees carefully collected sealed bags. They worked swiftly, with minimal noise, reattaching the green lids and making notes on their service checklist. For the seniors involved, the simple presence of the truck felt like a triumphant symbol. We are not alone. We will not be shamed. Across the street, Patricia, already awake in her neatly pressed pajamas, poked her head through her bedroom curtains. She saw that bright green truck and her rage soared. She slipped into a pair of sneakers, threw on a cardigan over her pajamas, and rushed outside in a state of near frenzy. The Clean Care driver, a middle-aged woman with a friendly smile named Carol Hernandez, raised a polite hand in greeting when Patricia approached the truck. "Good morning, ma'am. What are you doing here?" Patricia demanded, voice crackling with indignation. Carol remained cheerful yet firm, as she'd dealt with difficult situations before. "We're performing a scheduled pickup for clients who've contracted our service." Patricia's eyes flicked to the stack of sealed, labeled bags in the truck's cargo area. "This is a private neighborhood with strict rules about trash," she barked. "We have an HOA that demands any and all adult diapers be specially handled and—" Carol cut in smoothly. "Precisely why we were hired, ma'am. We handle all specialized medical disposals. We're fully licensed with the state and operate with the necessary certifications. If you'd like to see them, we have documentation in the cab. Who authorized you to come onto our property?" Each client we serve signed an agreement. As I'm sure you know, private property owners can hire whichever legal service they choose, and we're collecting from their driveways, not from common areas. Carol pointed gently to the curb. "We aren't touching the communal bins, so I don't see a conflict." Patricia huffed, her face reddening. She realized she had no actual authority to stop Carol from continuing. So she changed tactics, jabbing a finger at her name tag. "Well, I'll be speaking with your management. This is unacceptable. We have rules about such unsanitary items in this neighborhood, and your presence here violates our sense of standards." She turned on her heel and stormed off, only to pause, spin around, and snap a photo of the truck's license plate. Carol shook her head, feeling sympathy for whichever neighbor had to deal with that level of meddling. By 7:30 a.m., the Clean Care truck was gone, having successfully completed its pickups. Patricia spent the next 2 hours drafting a fresh set of emails, one to the board, one to the neighbors, and even one to the county's public health department. She demanded that an official investigation be launched into whether Clean Care Solutions was disposing of biohazards properly. She threatened that the HOA would take legal action against any homeowner who permitted a third party to endanger public health. But her barrage of emails fell short of their intended impact. The county's public health office responded politely that they had no reason to open an investigation, as the company was properly licensed and there were no recorded violations. The HOA board remained split. Patricia lacked the unanimous support she needed to rewrite the bylaws, and she was losing credibility among the community. Neighbors were openly mocking her new crusade to stop the private trash. For many in Rosemore Heights, this was the turning point. Patricia's zeal had transformed from overbearing to borderline tyrannical. And it wasn't just about adult diapers anymore. It was about privacy, dignity, and the fundamental right of people to make decisions for themselves without harassment. A few days later, Patricia organized an emergency HOA town hall. She emailed, in large, bold letters, "Critical public health meeting. Attendance mandatory." Several residents showed up, curious to see what new drama would unfold. Many were equally prepared to push back. The meeting took place in the same glass-walled community center that had hosted the previous board sessions. Patricia arrived early, a stack of official-looking documents in hand, determined to force a new regulation: no private waste pickup services without HOA approval. She planned to threaten fines, possibly even legal measures, though she had no real basis for them. The room gradually filled with residents. Harriet Green, Henry Caldwell, Martin and Sarah Ferguson, Daniel and Mia Garcia, and about 24 others staked out seats near the front. Greg Madsen, the treasurer, arrived looking apprehensive. 2 other board members, Linda Morris and William Tan, sat on Patricia's flanks, not entirely sure how this evening would play out. Patricia kicked things off with a shrill condemnation of outside waste disposal intruders, proclaiming them a threat. She soared into rhetoric about the stench of soiled diapers and potential disease vectors. But she overplayed her hand. The more hyperbolic she sounded, the more the neighbors shifted uncomfortably, exchanging looks of disbelief. About 10 minutes into her tirade, Harriet Green quietly rose from her seat and walked to the front. Patricia stopped mid-speech, glaring at the elderly woman. Harriet's chin was set firmly, her eyes steady behind her bifocals. "Patricia," Harriet began, "we appreciate your concern for cleanliness, but you're humiliating the seniors in our community." Her voice shook with emotion. "You have singled us out for circumstances we cannot control. You threatened us with fees, rummaging through our bins like we're criminals. And now you want to stop us from privately and discreetly managing our own waste. What gives you that right?" A hush fell over the crowd. Henry Caldwell slowly stood next. Though he walked with a cane, he somehow appeared strong and resolute. "I served this country in the Navy," Henry said quietly, voice carrying the weight of decades. "And now, in my twilight years, you want to find me for being old and incontinent. That's the message you've sent. But my neighbors stepped up to help me. They protected my dignity. And that should count for more than these arbitrary rules." Others chimed in. Sarah Ferguson spoke about caring for her mother. Daniel Garcia mentioned how many families were forced to choose between paying an unfair monthly fee and risking public embarrassment. With each voice, Patricia's position weakened. The tension in the room was palpable, but the moral argument was clear. She was harassing people for their medical needs. Seeing her carefully planned emergency meeting unravel, Patricia tried to fight back. She waved her printed documents. "I have the right, on behalf of the HOA, to maintain community standards," she cried, but the crowd was not swayed. Even Linda Morris, one of the board members typically allied with Patricia, said gently, "This policy seems overly harsh. I didn't sign up to shame people for medical necessities." Patricia's voice rose to a shrill pitch. "Then you're all fools. You're ignoring the health hazards." Greg Madsen finally intervened with authority. "That's enough, Patricia. We have no legal basis to ban a fully licensed private service. And the proposed fines, $15 per family, cannot be enforced without a bylaw amendment we do not have the votes to pass. It's time we let this go." Patricia's face seemed to crumble. She flicked her gaze around the room, seeing no support, only the frustrated or pitying eyes of her neighbors. She slammed down her stack of papers, nearly scattering them onto the floor. Then, as if too overwhelmed to continue, she grabbed her purse and stormed out. A collective exhalation swept through the crowd. Many broke out into applause, not because they enjoyed humiliating her, but because they'd stood up for themselves and for those who needed it most. After Patricia's dramatic exit from the emergency town hall, the board unanimously voted to rescind the new adult diaper rule entirely. Without her championing it, the policy collapsed. A note was sent to every household confirming that residents were free to use the communal bins for standard waste or to hire any private disposal service they wished. The dreaded $15 monthly fee disappeared, and the threat of random bin checks was formally disavowed by the board. For the rest of spring and well into summer, Clean Care Solutions continued their weekly rounds. Participation actually grew. Some seniors who had been too shy or skeptical eventually signed up, relieved to know that they could receive discreet, specialized service for items they found embarrassing. Younger residents contributed small donations to keep the costs manageable for those living on fixed incomes. The Rosemore Dignity Alliance unofficially stayed active, meeting once a month for coffee at Harriet Green's place and brainstorming ways to better support the elderly, like arranging meal drop-offs during flu season or volunteer yard work days. In the aftermath of her defeat, Patricia went through a period of marked sulking. She remained in her home for about 2 weeks, blinds drawn, venturing out only to pick up her mail or groceries. Rumors swirled that she was nursing her wounded pride and contemplating moving away. But surprisingly, she didn't leave. Instead, over time, She made small gestures that signaled a reluctant acceptance of the new status quo. One morning, Harriet Green was startled to find Patricia raking leaves along her front curb. It wasn't quite an apology. Patricia claimed it was a courtesy the HOA provided to seniors when needed, but Harriet recognized it as a peace offering. She thanked her politely. A few days later, Patricia stopped by Henry Caldwell's place to offer him a pamphlet about local senior programs. Though her manner was still stiff, Henry took it kindly, sensing a subtle shift in her tone. No one expected Patricia to transform overnight into an easygoing neighbor. She was still fussy about lawn ornaments and official forms. But her attempt to dominate the neighborhood had been permanently curtailed. She'd learned, in no uncertain terms, that the neighborhood would fight back if her rules crossed the line into cruelty. With the new era came a shared sense of pride and unity. Seniors felt respected, and families were able to breathe easy, knowing that if medical needs arose, they would not be singled out or demeaned. Camaraderie replaced the hush-hush atmosphere that had pervaded Rosemore Heights. Neighbors greeted each other more openly, organized block parties, set up little libraries on their lawns, and occasionally gathered to help each other with big house projects. There was a new spirit afoot. We look out for each other here. On a breezy summer afternoon, Harriet, Henry, Martin, Sarah, Daniel, Mia, and several of the other original Rosemore Dignity Alliance members hosted a potluck barbecue in Harriet's backyard. Over hot dogs and lemonade, they reminisced about how quickly everything had happened. They chuckled at the memory of Patricia stomping off, outraged but powerless. Yet they also took a moment to reflect on how a single policy could have inflicted genuine shame and burden on seniors, and how vital it was that they, as a community, had refused to stand by. Harriet tapped her glass to get everyone's attention. "We can't change the fact that we're all aging," she said softly. "And we can't change the fact that some of us need certain products to live comfortably. But we can control how we treat each other when challenges arise." She smiled around at the group, the summer sun highlighting the laugh lines on her face. "Thank you, each of you, for reminding us all about compassion." A warm applause followed, not as raucous as at the emergency meeting, but calmer, steeped in gratitude and goodwill. In that moment, they felt both relief and a renewed belief in the power of collective kindness. As the day wound down, they toasted to the neighborhood they loved, flaws and all, and to the seniors who had found fresh dignity in the face of adversity. In the end, Rosemore Heights emerged stronger. The tension Patricia sowed had, ironically, become the impetus for deeper bonds among the residents. Lessons were learned about the cost of tyranny and about the power of unity, and life in this suburban enclave continued, a little more thoughtful, a little kinder, and far more supportive of its elders. And that was the happy ending. A neighborhood awakened to its own strength, forging forward with dignity, empathy, and a renewed sense of community, proving, once and for all, that no amount of misguided Karen decrees could overshadow the simple truth that neighbors help neighbors, and everyone deserves respect.